Good morning. It is Wednesday, February 26th. Sorry we missed you yesterday. We had a lengthy floor session, so we didn't get to meet as a committee. We're going to spend this morning talking with some grain farmers in Vermont. We are hearing about how that is really starting to flourish in our state, which makes us very happy. At one time, Vermont was the largest producer of grain in New England. It'd be great to find a way to get back somewhat to that, but we're also hearing about challenges that they're facing as far as markets and storage and all of that stuff. So what better way to figure out about what the problems are than to have the people come in. So this is why you're here. So good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning.
Morning.
For the record, I'm Elizabeth Stipple, Working Lands Enterprise Initiative Program Manager. Thank you for having us back. I think we had two previous hearings that were very much focused on the Working Lands program itself. This is a different type of hearing. We do have two grant recipients that will be speaking today. But today the hearing is very much focused on grain growing and processing in Vermont. You're going to be hearing from 4 presenters who will be sharing their experience growing and processing and buying grain, local grain. They will be sharing, I think, both the challenges and the opportunities, and also their perspective on what is needed to further support grain growing and processing in Vermont, to give a future-oriented perspective. So first off, you will be hearing from Randy George from Red Hen Baking in Middlesex, Vermont, located in Middlesex, Vermont. The bakery, they're baking, buying, and milling local grains. And then you'll be hearing from Heather Darby, who is a part of the UVM extension, but also is a founding member of the Northern Grain Growers Collaborative. And then you will be hearing from Seth Johnston of Morningstar Farm in Glover, Vermont, a very diversified operation that includes growing grains and processing grain into flour, beans, and growing sunflowers and processing sunflowers into oil, as well as beef production. And then lastly, you'll be hearing from Todd Hardy, from the Champlain Valley Grain Center, which is in construction and is a visionary project that's going to be offering an array of supports to grain growers in Vermont. So I'm going to share my screen. So I want to highlight for, you know what, this is great. You know what? Maybe we don't need. I
I could jump in and say if Todd wants to start first, in some ways it makes sense to have a producer go before the end user. I mean, a grower before the end processor.
Hold on. There we go. Okay. Oh, wait. No. It's all in one presentation.
Okay.
So it's just an issue for some reason we're having an issue with the share. Oh. Okay, great. Resolved. So, very quickly, the Working Lands Enterprise Board is also interested in Vermont's, in supporting Vermont's grain growing and processing. They've made 4 investments to date. The first investment was to the Naga Bakehouse in Middleton Springs. This was an FY21 supply chain impact grant for $75,000 with a $75,000 match. And this allowed them to construct a granary where they were going to be processing grain. And then the second investment was to NEK Grains, who would have actually been present today had they not been on vacation this week with their family based in Waterford. They received an FY22 standard business grant, which is now called the Business Enhancement Grant, a $25,000 grant with a $25,000 match. And they bought a new mill, and they also completely revamped their farm store, where now you can go there and buy all of their flour products, including a pancake mix and just like pure ground flours, different kinds of flour.
What's the family name on that? NEK Grains, or is it the collaborative family?
James.
James. Okay,
Mhm.
oh, we know it as James.
I think it's a 4th generation
Yeah.
farm
Yeah.
at least. And they've transitioned into grains from dairy.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful
Um,
farm right on 90.
And actually, you
Yeah.
see the whole family there, which is just a nice picture. And then we had a small grant to the Northern Grain Growers. In our system, it's association, it's changed to collaborative. So it's now the Northern Grain Growers Collaborative. And it was a close to $10,000 grant with a close to $10,000 match to help them launch into their strategic planning process. And develop a website and a logo. And Heather is, representing the collaborative today. And then lastly, you're gonna, this is the second grantee that you'll be hearing from today, but our most recent grant to supporting the grain economy in Vermont is to the Champlain Valley Grain Center, which was also a supply chain impact grant, $150,000. This is a brand new under construction initiative. And I should have pointed out a $2.5 million match on this project. So it's a significant project with a lot of different investments needed. And they are going to be providing an array of critical services, drying, cleaning, storage to grain growers. But I won't go into it because Todd is going to explain the whole thing. So I think without further ado, I will pass it to Randy. Do you want me to just control the slides? Because they're just photos. So
Yeah, I don't know what order they're in. You want me to?
they're just 2
Oh, why the
slides,
chair, Randy.
three slides.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having us. So as Elizabeth mentioned, okay, Randy George, Red Hen Baking Company, Middlesex, Vermont.
Thank you.
My wife and I own Red Hen. We started in September of '99, so it's been a little more than 25 years. And 25 years ago, we started the business. We've always been certified organic. We've had an interest in supporting local agriculture, but I never could have imagined that we would be using any real significant amount of local grain. And it's thanks to the individuals that are also going to speak today and many others, that today, our grain sources at the bakery, about 99% of them come from 3 different sources within 300 miles of the bakery. One of those is Vermont, one's in upstate New York, one's just over the border in Quebec. These are all entities that I've gotten connected with through the Northern Grain Growers Collaborative. So I'll just quickly run through like how this all started, and I want to. What did I do to make that happen?
I think these are you have.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, Ren, can I ask you a quick question? Now that you're able to consolidate the grain a little bit with, you said 300 miles,
Mhm.
does that make it less expensive for you to do that?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. You know, the economics of this is all really important to me.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna make sure that I answer that.
Okay,
And if I
that's
don't
fine. No,
completely
yeah,
come back.
that's fair.
So we started out with this guy, working with this guy in the middle, Ben Gleason, who's now retired. But in 2000, about a year after we started, we discovered that he had been growing grain for a couple of decades at that point, growing wheat primarily, and also some dry beans in Bridport on his farm there. And we thought that would be a fun thing to try out. And really at that point, initially, it kind of was a fun thing. It had great flavor. We could put it in a bread up to about 20%. We found that it didn't have negative effects on the bread. And so we did that for some time, but Heather came on the scene soon after that, and she and Jack Laser and a few others started what is now the Northern Grain Growers Collaborative. And one of the first things that Heather did was find out what was going on in just north of the border in Quebec. And so that picture on the left there is a visit that Heather led to the farm that we now buy about 75% of our flour from. It's called Moulin de Sèvres, the mill that's in the town of Lacette. And they have about a 1,500 acre farm, 500 acres of grain production roughly every year. They started a value-added project about 10 years ago, and we buy about half of the wheat that they mill there. But along with that, kind of what Heather found out, and all of us who went on these visits to farms in Quebec, we found out about, the farmers primarily found out about ways to grow grain in this challenging, compared to what the places that grain is grown, typically Midwestern arid kind of climates. There are all kinds of things that have to be done differently. We can't just use that model, the Midwestern model in Vermont, pretend that that's going to work. So found out a lot about what was happening there. I'm sure Heather will talk about some of this stuff, but later she established the grain testing lab at UVM. Now farmers have a local option for getting their grain tested after harvest. So Ben later retired, but before he had retired, he had also been buying grain from a local farmer, and that's the guy in the middle and on the left here, Joe Hescock, Elysian Fields Farm. He's primarily a dairy farmer, and this is where I can get to talking about the economics a little bit. He has had a longstanding interest in growing grains, both for his cows and also for human consumption. So during the time that Ben was in business, and Ben had a mill, and so he was adding, his business model was based on a farm that was growing just grains and dry beans, and then adding the value himself by milling it. Joe is interested in growing grains, and it kind of stops there. And so while Ben, when he had the option of selling it to Ben, that worked out great for him. When Ben retired, he was left without a buyer for his grain. So we saw that was the time for us to buy a mill. It's worth noting that the mill that we got, there may be a picture somewhere in someone's presentation, but it's worth noting that Andrew Hine from New American Stone Mills is about 30 miles from here. Really, actually, though, I would say one of the leading innovators in stone milling in the world these days. And he really is shipping his mills around the world. So we got that in 2020, and so soon after Ben had retired, and this allowed us to start buying grain directly from Joe. And the thing about Joe's model is that he finds that he likes what grains do to his crop rotation and how he can manage soil health, and he's not doing it to make a lot of money. I don't know if anyone really in Vermont is getting into grains because they see that it's a way of making a lot of money. But it's part of a diversified farm system. And I'm sure Seth will speak to that as well. And it's important to him in ways that are, of course, we pay him a fair price for the grain, but we also are running a business. And it doesn't work for us if we have to pay more than the going rate for organic grain. And so there are, I would say it's different in a retail situation. If somebody's packaging something that there's a lot more work that goes into that. And then the retail market is maybe not as price sensitive as a business like ours would be. But the three partnerships that I mentioned are all in various ways structured so that they are producing something that a business like ours can afford and work within. We can keep our food costs where they need to be. And the way I see it with Joe's situation is that happens because, as I said, grains are important to him in ways beyond just whatever he gets per ton for them. What had been happening up until about 3 or 4 months ago is that, you combine grain, it needs to be, it's fairly clean, but not clean enough to actually turn into a loaf of bread. It's got a little chaff, it's got maybe weed seeds, other things that you don't want to be putting into your bread. So it has to get clean. And up until, as I say, 3 or 4 months ago, Joe had been trucking it over to just across the lake to Champlain Valley Milling. And they had a roller mill, which is a much bigger mill than the kind of thing that we have, but they also had a grain cleaning operation. And for a very affordable price, they would clean the grain. Suddenly, at the end of October, somewhere around there, they shut their doors after probably more than 30 years in business. So that all of a sudden, really overnight, that grain cleaning source dried up, and there were others in the state utilizing their services. So Joe scrambled, and as I say, he wants to be growing grain more than processing grain. But he did scramble because he knew that we wanted the grain, and he wanted to find a place to sell it. So he found a used grain cleaner up in Maine, and he doesn't see this as a viable long-term solution for him, but he is setting up once a month, setting up his grain cleaner and doing it like a Vermonter would, putting a tent out and cleaning our grain. So that's kind of working for now, but this gets to probably what Todd's going to be talking about as far as what farmers need if they're going to be selling to.
That is exactly why we're happy to have you guys in here. And yes, we like to hear the success stories. We always love to hear the success stories, but in a short amount of time that you have, and we don't want to take away from what you want to tell us, but that's exactly where we want to get to so that we can kind of formulate a plan as far as in our thinking about what can we do best for you.
Yeah,
that's really what we want to do. We want to be able to support your growing business and do that. And I just want to, Lieutenant Governors come into the room and
something I'm very interested in.
yeah. Well, we got a seat for you right here.
Yeah, I don't know where I'm at with time. I can answer questions.
Well, why don't we get anybody got any questions? Why don't we get everybody through it? Yeah.
So being that he cleans the grain, does he get a little better,
I'll sit here till he gets
a little better price? Or
Yeah, I think he gets, the way it was working is that we were paying him for the clean grain. He was paying Champlain Valley Milling. So maybe it has something to do with the fact that why they shut their doors, but nobody could figure out how they could do it so affordably. So I can't remember exactly. Maybe somebody here knows. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 8 cents a pound to clean it. But anyhow, he's not seeing it as a great savings because of.
But he was selling it to you already at that price, so he just absorbed that in his.
So we're paying the same price to him.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I'll say that. I explained that it's important to us that we can work with farmers who can sell at a price that's more or less in line with what grain prices typically are. But there have been situations with Ben, with a few others, including Joe, where I said, hey, prices are generally going up. I pay 5 or 10 cents more a pound. It's important to me that this be fair. That this is not. We're not doing this to try to get a good deal. We're trying to do this to support the local agricultural economy and also run our business.
A fair price.
Yeah,
But they have to get a fair price too, or they're out of business.
exactly. And I could go on for a lot longer, but there are lots of stories of the farmers that we partnered with over the years. But just to be real quick about it, we at one point we're working with Nitty Gritty Grains, which is on Aurora Farm in Charlotte, and they were having flour milled at Champlain Valley Mills. They're a business that's hurting right now because all of their processing is being done by Champlain Valley. And we were for several years buying flour from them. I convinced Champlain Valley Mills to pay them more, to pay Tom Kenyon, the farmer, more for the grain than they would for Montana or a source like that, because it was the shipping offset the cost. So it was at that time I remember the numbers being $18 a bushel, is what Tom wanted to get. The mill wanted to pay 12, but that's what they were paying for Montana, plus $4 to $6 to get it there. So, we do have that advantage if we're talking about a situation where there's not nearly as much trucking.
And Randy, I think we should switch.
Yeah.
And then if that works for the senators, just to keep, I just want to make sure.
So I want to get everybody
Hearing
through,
from
I want to get everybody through, and we
And then
have
pass.
about 15 minutes, been a little over 15 minutes.
Yeah, great.
Yep. So,
Thanks.
thank you.
Hi, Heather Derby, University of Vermont Extension. Thanks for having me again. As was already stated, I've been working in grain at the University of Vermont since I started my job 22 years ago. And really at that time was when there started to be a real strong interest in buying local. Like it became something more prominent than it was prior to that. Some of that had to do with Bill McKibben and his book that he came out with. So at that time, it was really easy for people to go to a farmer's market and buy tomatoes, et cetera, so on. But what they couldn't find were staples, right? They couldn't find like grain bread. And so they started to go to Randy and they wanted to know how much local grain he had in his bread, because most people buy bread, they don't make it. And so there was this increasing demand for food grade grains and very, very few farmers growing it here in Vermont. And that remains the case today. That number really hasn't increased. It's been about the same for 20 some odd years. Some of the farmers that were growing grain, that started growing grain, like Jack Blazer and Ben Gleason, have either passed and Ken Van Hazinga, another person, really the leaders, have either passed or retired at this point. And so there's been a few new folks that have come in and kind of taken their place. But what we want to see is more opportunity. So what's limiting the opportunity, which is what you want to hear. And,
Yes.
the limitation is processing infrastructure.
Right.
And the middle dealer. I don't know what else to call it, right? So in Quebec, the reason we went up there is because, okay, it's different than here, not that different, right? So what are they doing? And there was a fellow up there, Robert Beauchemin, who had reinvigorated small grain production in Quebec. And if you ever go up there and you go to a bakery, which is sort of a chain, I guess, called Premier Moisson, really, he is like one of the suppliers of Premier Moisson, which is a chain of high quality baked products in Quebec. And so this drive to get the quality and the volume of grain in Quebec was a challenge to them, much of what we're going through for the last 20 years. And we have not solved that, but they did. And now they have Lowick's farm. I call it Lowick's farm, but the farm that Randy purchases from, spin-offs from what he did once people realize that it could be really successful. Okay, so we have a lot of bakeries, very fine bakeries in Vermont and beyond that want to buy high quality, not just local, but high quality. And that's a really important point because it's not that easy to meet the quality parameters. But there really is no supply. Could there be a supply? Probably, and this is the time to do that, but there's no way to get it from the farm to the bakery. And Randy just talked about that, right? And so as much as in Vermont, we're like, we're going to do it ourselves, make it ourselves and bring it right to the person that's going to eat it. We need the person in the middle to be able to take that grain and convert it into the products that these bakeries need. And that does not exist here. And now the one place we had in New York does not exist. And there's limited, capabilities in Maine. Actually, that's the only other place where there's a decent facility where people could sell to. The other slight limitation I see is, and don't shoot me, the rest of the people here. I mean, is that it has been 100% organic focused, with the exception of NEK Grains, which is, I would say, they're not an organic farm, but they have excellent practices in place and have figured out ways to market their grain, even though it's not certified organic. And that has limited also, the individuals that come into the marketplace. I think there's room for both, and an opportunity for it to grow, but that's the big piece. There's no milk.
And what we're seeing is we're talking about this thing, of all these emerging markets. I think we have 23 categories now of farmers. And what we're seeing is we're moving forward. The reason why we so want to know the nuts and bolts of it is that we want to be able to close the gap between buying local and where people can buy elsewhere. And I mean, we can just throw money at something, right? But if we don't throw it in the right, it's not going to solve that problem so that you're not priced yourself out of the market. That, hey, listen, it's better quality. You're willing to pay a little bit more, but it really isn't that much more.
There's a larger bakery in Massachusetts, that had come down to Vermont, really, really interested in buying local grain, setting up a mill, etc. Just no path, couldn't see a pathway forward, right? So, you have to have an entrepreneur that would be attracted to come here and set up shop like that, because it's not as simple, as you said, as throwing money at it. Right? Because we could invest a ton of money in something, but then not have the person that can really make that a go. And, Todd's going to talk about his facility, but I think there's room for more than one. And we need that. I mean, it could draw in grain from other places at this point. And you have bakers and other food grade grain users all around the region.
I'm just wondering if you guys have a rough idea, what does it cost to set up a
I think,
processing?
Todd will have
got
that.
that. Okay.
We did a feasibility study. I don't know if you remember that, Randy. Because Robert Beauchemin was from Quebec, was interested in coming into Vermont because a lot of his sales were to Vermont bakers and into the US in the region, but just couldn't see how it would work for him. I don't know if you remember that whole
Because
process.
the other thing is, we are in a unique place here in Vermont where we're within a day's drive of 120 million people.
Yeah.
So there has to be places in Massachusetts and Connecticut, New York and New Jersey that would also like to source this locally.
And not only that, Lieutenant Governor, we have the infrastructure as far as roadways and railroads and
farmers.
and farmers. And we have the infrastructure with even, I know it's hard to believe, but at some point in time, we're going to be flying out of some of these airports. We're going to be flying to markets as we go. So we have the infrastructure here, and Vermont's done a very good job to keep all of those open and to get to those markets, to get to those people that you're talking about.
So there's a lot of, sorry, go ahead.
Why did the guy in New York close?
I think it's complicated. I mean, I think it was partly economics. There was a retirement there. I'm looking at Randy, but a lot of it was around economics, outdated facilities.
Okay.
I mean, there was Sam Sherman was the owner. And then he had passed it on to his daughter. So I think there was just a lot of.
My understanding was that in the process of that, like the less hands-on management, they lost a couple of big accounts.
Oh,
They were selling to like Wegmans.
oh,
So anyway, I think, there were some
Yeah.
quality control issues.
I also heard, and it seemed like this would make sense, that they were selling a lot to Vermont Bread Company when that
Oh, right.
suddenly went down.
That's right. And farmers in New York
Tough.
lost money because they never got paid from
Mm.
the company here.
So can we assume there's some of this equipment sitting around that would actually work to set up here, or is
Yeah, I
Todd
think
gonna
Todd's
address that
gonna
as
talk
well?
about that.
I called Sam up 2 months ago. It's all tied up with a bond that the town is partner in. And they can't do a thing until they work through all that paperwork.
But even beyond that, are there
Yeah,
other
there's
bills that
equipment. Yeah, yeah,
include? Okay,
I mean, yes,
because when somebody
Yeah.
goes to set up,
yeah.
it's much more efficient if they can buy good
Yeah.
used equipment than having to go
Yeah.
out and buy brand.
And, I'm sure Todd will address that. I mean, there's other pieces, right? There's the support of the farmers to help them grow high quality grain because it's not for livestock. You have to have that secondary market as well,
Mhm.
right? So we can add value by selling into the food industry, but it's not always going to make the grade because not just because of where we live, it's just the reality of growing grain for the food grade market. But here, we have challenges and it doesn't always make the cut. So then where does it go? Because we want those farmers to be able to stay in business if they lose a year, and they can't sell it to Randy or whoever they're selling it. Where's it going to go? Which is where the livestock industry here is also critically important to the diversification on other farms. So we have to think about those secondary markets, and we're lucky to have livestock in this state, but thinking about how to connect those dots so that, whoever's just growing grain is able to have secondary markets when they can't meet the, top quality.
Yeah.
So there's education and outreach, and not to promote my things that I do specifically, but that's where extension has come in and tried to help farmers learn how to best grow these crops, the research around what varieties actually grow here, which they're all coming out of places that grow grain, which are different from here. So us really trying to figure out what's going to be best here. Randy mentioned our lab. It was the grain quality testing lab that was supported by the grain growers, some foundations that don't exist anymore. I think the Working Lands even pitched in before it was a Working Lands. It was like the AIB. I don't know, this is probably before your time, Elizabeth, but to set up a testing lab. It was the first public, and actually it's still only one of 2 public testing labs that now serves the entire nation. Because most state quality labs like ours are supported through the state, and they don't take samples from anywhere else because they're subsidized with state dollars. So our lab supports all the farmers here in a very timely manner. You can call up Hillary and just say, I need that sample today, and she'll follow through and get it for them. So lots of pieces. My time's up.
well, let's get some of these producers in
Yep.
here. Let's see what we can do to help them.
And you wanna run the
Yeah, sure.
show on all this?
So the pictures for Seth are just, they're just gonna be, samples of his production, but not necessarily matching to his talking points, but he wanted you to have some images
No
of
problem.
his farm.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been working with Heather and many other people in this room for about 20 years. My name is Seth Johnson. Me and my wife, my wife Jeanette and myself operate Morningstar Farm in Glover. And actually, I bumped into John in the hallway when I was heading, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And so I told him why we're here, and
That's why I'm here.
And so anyway, it's really good to have a lot of friends here and have a lot of experience working with people in this room. And I'm also a board member in the Northern Grain Growers Collaborative. But I'll give you a little different perspective, kind of where we're at, and we do a lot of growing and processing of grains ourselves. We have a farm off, diversified organic farm off Route 16 in Glover. I studied field crop production at Andrews University in Michigan. Received a bachelor's of technology in field crop production, graduated in 2003. And during that time when I was at school, I actually had the opportunity to get introduced to grains by working up at Butterworks for Jack and Ann Fixer. That's actually about the time I met Heather, probably around 2002, 2003. And started to form these relationships in the grain community. After graduation, I actually started working at Butterworks, worked there for about 5 years, mostly in the cropping side of things, but got experience combining. That's where I became experienced with cleaning grains and what it takes for the different types of grains to grow and also process. It was during that time I could really see the benefits of a diversified farm model, really different income streams and being able to process your own crop into a value added product. So we're not trying to compete necessarily with commodity prices or, producers that are up in the Midwest because it's a different type of farming here. So I worked off the farm in total for about 10 years, all the time, slowly building up equity in the farm, building up, lands, equipment, buildings, things like that for about 10 years while working off the farm at the same time. In 2013 is when we started farming full time. This is really what allowed us to expand our acreage, start a beef herd, also move into more mechanized forms of harvest like mechanized bean harvesting. We purchased a lot of equipment from Butterworks, who was getting out of growing beans. And some of these might be pictures of the processing. I don't know if there's some bean harvesting equipment, but we also started at this time doing custom harvesting. And I bought a newer combine, actually because I started working with NEK Grains, Sean, who we were describing, we got the Working Lands grant. He actually, for the first 3 years, we harvested all their grain. They're only about 30 miles from us. So we actually drive the combine right down the road and harvested his grain until he basically had built up enough capital that he purchased his own combine. And anyway, so that brings us to today. So currently we're farming about 450 acres of certified organic hay and field crops, about 300 acres of hay, 25 acres of dry beans. Dry beans, there's some examples here. That's like a 7 bean mix. Most of the beans and flour and stuff we sell in bulk to co-ops and health food stores all around New England, mostly in Vermont.
Oh, is that what that is? Because I thought we were supposed to guess how many beans.
Yeah, I was gonna bring 7 different jars, but my wife said we sell like a mix. If you go to City Market, Hunger Mountain, right down the road here, whatever, you'll go into the bulk section, you'll see Morningstar Farm. You'll have like 7 different bulks bins.
I guess I can go patching my guess then.
Yeah, but that's just a mix of all the different types we grow. There's Pintos, blacks, kidneys, Jacob's cattle, cranberries, many different beans that people haven't even heard of. But they actually grow well here in Vermont. We've had really good success. In addition to the beans, we do about 30 acres of black oil sunflowers, which is represented by the oil there. I'll talk about that in a minute.
That's a beautiful oil.
Yeah, that's actually a prototype of our very first label. We've never sold anything shelf ready, like that, ready to go on the shelves, but that's the very first one I got. I brought some samples of unlabeled oil, but our labels will be ready here in a few weeks.
That would sell labeled too.
Yeah. No, typically we're selling most of this stuff in bulk, except for the sunflower.
You're probably gonna get to where your markets are. You're starting to talk about it a little bit right now. Okay.
Yep. So crop rotation, I'll just skip over. We do crop rotation is really important. We do sod hay the first year, second year dry beans, third year sunflowers and corn, and the fourth year corn and then sunflowers.
Okay, so we're gonna see corn on the Route 16 fields this year.
Yeah. So
Okay,
you've seen probably the sunflowers.
every time I go by, what's he growing now?
Yeah, it's actually a really good opportunity because I've actually had, in the process of starting to grow sunflowers in the last 3 years, I've had so many different people approach me about like wanting me to farm their land, because they're like, we want you to grow sunflowers in our front yard.
I think that's the most photographed field in all.
Oh, God,
it's county.
Traffic hazard once in a while.
It really is.
So we literally had to set up a farm stand with parking because like it literally was causing a traffic jam.
Oh, yeah, it really was.
But it's a good opportunity for me to explain about the health of the soil and crop rotation and how like, hey, listen, it's going to be there this year, but next year it's not going to be there because we're going to have it in one of our other.
You had beans before.
Yeah, so that's where this crop rotation is really important. And then also another part of this is seeding it back down, allowing the organic matter to build up. Because Heather used to tell me years ago, she's like, if you can have it in, sod production, you can actually build up almost like 1% organic matter per year. And so we seed after the corn and sunflowers, we seed it down to hay. And so that field you'll see will be a mix of alfalfa timothy, which helps to break up the pest and disease cycle, weed cycle, but also helps to build organic soil. So I'll just skip over some of this stuff. Like we produce a bunch of 2,000 round bales, about 10,000 squares.
Can you give this to Bruce?
We do the dry beans. We do about 25 acres of dry beans. That's our biggest cash crop, and it drives the need for the crop rotation on our farm. We start harvesting in September, pulling and windrowing. We've got some pictures. This is the processing equipment. Corn, the corn we grow is some for human consumption. That last picture, actually, if you back up, that's a corn dryer, which we purchased up in Canada last year. One more back.
This
So-
way?
Yep, back up one more. That's a corn dryer. So that holds about 400 bushels of corn.
On the left.
Yeah, on the left. And this is our flour mill on the right, which Randy was describing. New American Stone Mills made right in Morrisville. The mill and then the sifter is right next to it. And so Randy has something really similar, and you basically use that to mill the flour and then sift the bran out and make either all-purpose white or whole wheat, whatever you're going after. So the corn that we grow is mainly for livestock feed for our own cattle, but also it's an important part of the rotation. In any type of the systems that we're doing, whether we're cleaning our wheat, our beans, our sunflowers, there's always byproducts. So with sunflowers, when you press the oil, you're going to have sunflower meal. So that's an important protein source. With beans, you're going to have splits. When you sift, you're going to have bran. So we actually have kind of a side business, retail chicken feed business. So chickens have been in the news a lot lately, but lots of people have backyard flocks and are looking for local sources of grain for that. So we actually don't advertise at all. We mill about 4,000 to 5,000 pounds a month. And it's basically just the byproducts, but also we mix in this corn and the corn is probably one of the main ingredients, but it's a good outlet for us for all these cleanings. Because with any kind of facility, like Todd's going to talk about, you're going to have cleanings and you're going to have stuff that's good for animal consumption, but that not necessarily for human consumption. What do you do with that? And so having other markets. So that's kind of like what Heather was talking about. That's like our secondary market for our cleanings and our grain. So I don't know how much more time, but the newest project is our sunflower oil. So we started growing about 3 years ago. We started selling for birdseed, but could quickly see that it's much more valuable for human consumption as oil production. Those you plant in May, we harvest in October. We clean and dry them ourselves, and then there's really no certified organic oil processing abilities in Vermont. So we actually bring them. You can see the sunflowers when they're ready to harvest. The combine cuts them off. We pulls everything in. So people always think you harvest the sunflowers at the growing stage, but they completely dry down to this stage in October. And then once they're as low moisture as you can get, it's tricky to get them dry enough, but also get them out of the field before the birds, because when they're the last thing in town, these big flocks of starlings, bears, turkeys, everything loves sunflowers. So the trick is to get them out of the field. But that's where, like, if I was to grow those sunflowers in that field next year, the wildlife pressure would be much worse that next year, because they know they're going to be there. When you're constantly rotating, you have that benefit of you're always, when I worked at Butterworks, Jack would say, you always rotate to a different field because you kind of keep the wildlife guessing, where it's going to be. Yeah. But anyway, but this is our first venture into retail packaging ourselves. So
You're pressing now, you have the.
So I started to get into that. There's no certified organic processors for sunflower oil. So we actually bring it to Maine. I bring big super totes about once a month. And my friend Sean, who has an organic farm in Maine, has the oilseed press. And we'd love the ability to be able to purchase an oil press at some point to be able to press, because I have tons of farms that have approached me about, like, listen, once you get set up and you have this line going, could we grow sunflowers in our rotation? Like, we don't want to get into harvesting and all that stuff. So there's definitely the emerging market for that. And John actually has mentioned, like, hey, listen, I have land. Would you be interested? And like I said, I wouldn't be interested in doing it continuous on fields every year, but there's definitely the opportunity, there for people to grow an alternative crop.
So where are you marketing? How are you? Where are you pushing your product to? How do you get it to there? What infrastructure are you using for that?
So we clean and process, other than the sunflower oil, mostly ourselves. Most of the grains we sell either directly to bakeries. So we work a lot with. We actually work with King Arthur Flour in Norwich. So they buy from us. We sell some to Randy at Red Hand. Naga Bakehouse, we sell them wheat. And there's several other bakeries local in Vermont. But the majority of the retail stuff that we sell like is in bulk sections. So you go to City Market, Healthy Living, all the different co-ops, health food stores in Vermont. Green Mountain Farm Direct up in Newport is an important partner with us.
John Ramsey out of Hardwick is.
Yep. So they don't market for us, but they actually pick up every Wednesday at the farm. So Farm Connects, which is part of CAE, they pick up once a week, and they are actually what delivers to all these different customers to us in Burlington. So it's, really appreciate the time to present to you a little bit about what we do. And I just wanted to stress, like, we believe strongly in diversity on our farm, not only from a crop rotation standpoint, but also diversity in income streams from different types of crops and livestock to also adding value to the crops we produce by processing them. We're able to extract as much value as we can from the products that we produce. So
Beef market is going where? Local?
I didn't know if I'd have time to present about that, but the Angus beef are what we call our nutrient retention program. So they are able to take relatively low nutrient inputs like hay, straw, wood chips, and turn it into a really high value compost that we use to produce the crops that we grow. And then we're selling mostly from the farm at this point, not slaughtering ourselves, but selling either live steers or to people that want to do like quarters and halves themselves. We're not selling anything under like inspection yet or label.
Okay.
But we have the opportunity. We're actually in the process of starting a farm store that's a farm, and we'll at that point probably slaughter some beef under inspection.
Because you have the Colburns that do that in Glover as well. And they're
Exactly, yeah.
doing very well with
There's
their
several people, Harvey, Dunbar
Right,
as well.
who's retiring.
Yep. We have an excellent location there on 16 too. I mean, we have many people every day that just come pick up products themselves directly anyway, but we put the sign at the end of the road, which we're right the 10th of a mile off Route 16. So we'd have a really good, market. But
The other thing I'd like to mention that Seth didn't is what those huge sunflower fields do for pollinators, because I plant a huge amount of sunflowers every year in my crop rotations, and I plant driller radishes and turnips, a couple of types of legumes, several types of grains, including buckwheat, because that's also good for pollinators. But when you walk out through one of those fields, it is just busy with bees. And then, as he said, because I don't get mine harvested at the right time because they're there to feed the wildlife. And you can't believe how fast the birds clean those. And the deer will walk up to them and eat a whole flower. It's just loaded with protein. And so it is massive wildlife.
the bears love them. I guess share one story. We were out in the field combining this year, and it's a great big old black bear, about 150 yards in the field in the middle of the day. I'm combining. He stands up on his back to it. He had a sunflower in his and they eat it like a lollipop. I mean, like a popsicle or something. He's just taking big bites out of it,
But it's pure protein.
And he's like,
Was he shaking his pie?
he's like, what are you doing in my field? He was like, great big combine, loud and everything. And here it wasn't bothering him. We got a little closer and he kind of wandered off. But anyways, sunflowers are fun because it brings a lot of joy to people too. I mean, we haven't even explored the opportunities of tourism, having some sort of like a sunflower maze, or you could do that plus harvest them after. There's so many different, and Heather and her team have done a lot of research in the last, most of that was probably over 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, with Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, we had a huge initiative on farm fresh fuel.
So this is our prototype, our very first label. So I've got some other samples of sunflower oil.
Where do you buy that? Where do you buy the oil?
So we haven't started marketing yet, but we're gonna have our labels done. I brought some just plain bottles to give you guys some samples of it, but it'll be available in Burlington at any one of the co-ops in Newport up at.
Glover?
Yeah, well,
Newport,
probably, at Couriers too, yeah.
And your farm stand.
Yeah, at the farm stand too, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but this is like, we literally just got our proof of our label last week. So I just attached it last night to the label. And so we'll have that ready in the coming weeks, as for retail locations all around. So, but yeah.
Looks
So
great.
quite a very viable business then. You've been at it how many years?
25 years.
And very equitable, very solid business that could tell a young farmer maybe down our way in Addison that if they're looking for,
Oh, definitely, yeah. We believe in like diversity, so we never do like just one thing. We're always kind of multiple income streams. So we had some flooding last year in some of our bean fields. The field right across from Nature by Design Rescue, probably
Yeah,
that field
yeah.
flooded really bad last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
I never put all my beans in one field, all my eggs in one basket. We're always rotating, and that's the reason, because even though that field was flooded, I had two others up on the hill that survived and did
I used to own
okay.
that field.
What's that?
I used to own that field.
Oh, really?
And it destroyed,
So it's got winter rye in it now.
Yeah.
So that's a
Flooded
new
that
thing.
to destroy it?
No, it took out about half of it. Half of it was okay up on the hill. But anyways, the parts
that's
that
good for
got,
animal consumption at that point, not human consumption.
yeah, we actually, another great reason to have the cows. A lot of that stuff, we mowed it, we actually round baled it, and we're using it as bedding. And the cows, even though it wasn't good for human consumption, having the cows as like my backup plan, I'm feeding it to them as round like baleage, you know? And so that's why kind of having, in my opinion, having a diversified farm with, you know, some livestock, grain, you know, different things that it kind of helps to weather some of those, you know, those storms and things like that.
It's great farmland unless it floods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get Todd in
Thank
here
you.
and then, let's get Todd in and,
Elizabeth,
You want to control your.
why don't you do it? I'll talk
Okay.
for 5 minutes before the flight starts.
Okay.
Shall I wait?
no, go ahead, please.
Okay, it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you all. Todd Hardy, Greensboro. I've been growing winter rye for 10 years. President of the Northern Grain Growers Collaborative, and I'm on the board of NOFA Vermont. And it's really a community. I'm connected to every one of these people here. Sylvia is our vice president. She does trials. Heather, our secretary treasurer, has been a real partner with UVM Extension and Agronomy. The Working Lands folks, Claire, Elizabeth, have supported us with some grants that we've used over the years for insulating our grain cleaning facility and now the Champlain Valley Grain Center that we're building in Ferrisburg. And all the money and the support from the state of Vermont, the people of Vermont and Working Lands, we're using to leverage for a lot of return. So we're all connected. And Seth Johnson has combined our grain for years. And we've sold tons of grain to Randy George at Red Hen. And that's been a blessing for us. Our grain is now in Montpelier, also at Caledonia Spirits. They're making whiskey with the rye that I grew and organic corn and barley to start it aging for sale at the Grain Center in Ferrisburg. And by buying the grain earlier, we're supporting our mission of supporting grain farming families, the working landscape, organic agronomy, plants and soil and jobs. And we're grateful for the support with current use for UVM Extension and all that you folks do here. And I saw that I could have a greater impact by building a grain center at the corner of Route 7 and 22A in Ferrisburg. And Elizabeth's going to start the first slide. It's a tremendous opportunity to have a greater impact. I worked with dairy farmers across Vermont that have stopped milking cows and are now growing grain. The North Hardwick farm in Hardwick hasn't milked cows for about 40 years, and I've helped them start a farm distillery, and we buy their grain. The Jang farm, we work closely with them. They're not milking cows anymore. Seth Johnson. So that's a passion that we have for giving farmers another market.
Well, and I wanted to say something about that as well, because you bring up the Jane farm. I think that they were really at a loss once that they wanted to get out of dairy. They didn't really know what they were going to do. They had all that beautiful land there, all those beautiful infrastructures of buildings that they had just put millions of dollars in.
Yeah.
And now to have them find another way is very important.
We helped them get jump started by trading a silo. We had 2 silos. We weren't growing barley anymore, but we were going to continue to grow rye. And Sean Zhang and his daughters and wife came and took our silo apart and took it back to Waterford. And the trade was they planted our crops for 3 years.
Yeah.
So we helped them get started. Really important work they're doing. They're an inspiration.
Yeah.
So everybody pretty much eats bread. All the farmers that we're working with are producing really high quality bread. There are bakers scattered across Vermont. And there's a tremendous opportunity for more good bread in Vermont. And we're going to be doing that in Ferrisburg, and we're also going to be making whiskey. Whiskey is really what makes it possible. The value that you can build into a product. We could do fine with grain for bread, but by having whiskey, it really makes it more successful to pay the farmers more. That's why we're doing it. We are copying Maine Grains and Skowhegan, Maine's model with their total support and grace of grain for bread, grain for pizza dough, frozen waffles, selling bread at the grain center. And they're a real inspiration to us. So,
Can you tell us a little bit about the strains of grain that you're growing and how they might be different in Vermont versus other places?
I am transitioning from growing rye to being in a business to grow fine grain. And Seth can talk about the strains of grain more than I can. What we're doing is we're continuing Jack Laser's work. And I think this addresses your question more of breeding corn for Vermont. There's a term from years ago in Europe called landrace. And Jack took seeds from Heather that she picked up in New York that came from Canada that grow well for corn in Vermont. And the corn is bred over years to come up early in the cold soil of the Vermont early summer season. So Seth's doing the same thing, selecting for Vermont. We're doing it with honeybees on the land where we raise queen bees from survivors. I've been a beekeeper all my life, peeking out at 1,900 beehives for years before I shifted into grain. The bees are getting stronger. The weak ones die off and the stronger ones survive, and we turn 1 into 3 on the land. No chemicals, all organic, because chemicals hide the natural process. And that's what we're doing with grain, working with farmers that are selecting for changes in the climate. And that's really exciting.
Yeah.
So we're going to be supplying bakers and brewers and distilleries with our grain from the grain center in Harrisburg.
So it doesn't sound like you have any problem of getting your product distributed out there, getting it used. And in fact, it sounds like you could grow the market bigger.
We will grow the market. You know, I can pick up a phone right now and get grain out of Finger Lakes, New York and Hudson Valley, but we always favor Vermont farmers. And so we have to plan ahead. I'm part of the USDA sponsored TOP program, TOPP, that Heather and I work with the Northern Grain Collaborative. Transition to organic partnership. And I mentor Tyler Murray, who's buying a farm in southwestern Vermont. And he's growing wheat and corn and barley and supplying bakeries all over Vermont and Massachusetts and New York. So I have a real heart for the young farmers, and we mentor them. Just like I mentored Nick and Taylor Meyer at the North Hardwick Farm when they started the high drive distillery. The need is there. We still, as a state, bring in most of our grain from out of state, from the West. This is grain predominantly that is grown with chemicals that are causing the farmers to get cancer. Chemicals are dangerous. People to get gluten intolerances that are hurting the soil structure and the honeybees. So by growing grain in Vermont with less chemicals organically, we can provide something that's more nutritious for the consumer and for the farmer to grow,
And build the soil at the same time.
build the soil.
I wanted to add one thing too. I think Todd had a good point about, there's something about things that are produced in Vermont. Like I grew up in Massachusetts. We moved up here when I was 15. And I remember as a kid just thinking, man, something from Vermont, just something about it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So like when we were working with a branding agency to develop that label, that was like, it was one of several things that they wanted to highlight. It was certified organic. One of the main, it was grown locally, but also it's from Vermont. So we put right on the front of the label, grown and produced in Vermont. And I think having a processing center in Vermont where you're focused on buying grains primarily from Vermont producers if possible, you know, and Heather's mentioned that in the past too, just having the focus be, you know, something when a product is grown or from Vermont, it has just something about it, especially in the Northeast here, where it just has we have a really good brand, you know, and I think.
Well, we do, and the numbers that just come out now that Vermont and agriculture are neck and neck as far as with the dollars produced in the state. It's 4.2 billion.
Yeah.
But what we can say about Vermont agriculture is that the tourism wouldn't be the same without Vermont, without Vermonters farming, because
Right.
it's this vision. When you go to places that don't farm anymore, you go into northern New Hampshire, you go into northern New York, and you drive down the road, you can't see anything. The scrub brush is grown up. But in Vermont, you go up through West Glover or anywhere you want to go. You just get on a back road right here, and every corner you come around, there's the most beautiful view that you've ever seen in your life until you get to the next corner. And that is because of what Vermont farmers have done.
That's right.
And so, and that's really where it is. And that's why it's important. And I think that the story to be told here is exactly what you've just said, is that we are an agriculture state. And we're not dying. We're growing. And we need to keep on expanding those markets. We need to make sure that the young people keep on coming in. And it's not your father's Buick anymore, your grandfather's Buick anymore. And when you talk to these young farmers, they talk about scaling. They talk about market share. They got an aversion to avoid debt at all costs, unless they know that they can make it earn. And so that is the story to be told. And this committee is going to tell that story with the help of you folks.
Well, and a lot of people don't realize that Vermont, like you mentioned at the very beginning, Russ, like Vermont used to be the breadbasket of the country.
Right.
You know, you look at Ceres, is it the goddess of agriculture on the Capitol building here? She's holding shocks of wheat. You look at our emblem, everything, wheat shocks on it. I mean, Vermont used to be the breadbasket, and you know, could be again.
Well, I think we're well on our way of doing that. And that's why we're very interested in, you know, hearing again the stories of. So can we spend a little time? We've only got like 10 minutes left. Can we spend a little time of what we need to be focused on as an ag committee or in the state of driving monies to you? What is something that, where can the money be best spent if Vermont's to invest?
The infrastructure is really important. Because of the working lands and you all, the people of Vermont, we're able to take for the grain center in Ferrisburg, the part of the equipment in Montpelier to buy 18,000 pounds of corn, 1,900 pounds of rye, 1,900 pounds of barley, and make a product, a Vermont branded product. And those two stainless steel tanks that we have across the city here are so important to help us get started. So we are leveraging with the money that you put into infrastructure, a great return, and we need more of that. And every farmer really counts on that. Farming is tough with taxes and the operational costs. It's a huge challenge and it's a commitment. And when we can have more support for infrastructure, I know that we'll have more and greater return. And thank you for supporting UVM Extension. We couldn't do this without them and Heather and her team. I'll let others speak.
So Todd, before we go, you're in my backyard. Where in Ferrisburg exactly are you building this? So I
Headed down from Charlotte, Burlington, the first right-hand turn into Virgins, the land on the right.
Big open area.
The land between Route 7 and the Park and Ride and
right there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think this is a-
Nothing started as of yet, correct?
Just the beehives. The bees always come first in my life.
All right.
And then, we'll put the road in and start the building later this year.
Okay, great.
And are you still thinking of doing the distillery there, or is that to come later?
That will happen right away.
That will.
And that's why we're making whiskey in Montpelier, because it takes 4 years to age. And the cost of doing business without having a product to sell
Mhm.
is formidable.
Yeah.
So we'll have that to sell.
What's the brand name of the whiskey? What's the whiskey's name?
It'll be Thornhill Farm, my family farm from 200 years ago in Scotland. When we sailed on a sailboat to the USA, and every farm since then, including my farm at Greensboro. Yeah.
Well, and one of the points that Todd made to me when we've had discussions at my place is when he started with honeybees, he wasn't making enough money. And he went through this whole process. And when he started making money was when he turned that honey into gin.
Yeah.
And by turning these farm crops into beer and spirits, there is a higher profit margin. You are adding that value to these products, and
You gotta find the way to do that because we don't have the population. And so you gotta find something that's gonna turn, as you've said.
that the tourists are going to pick up, that it's going to sell in that 120 million person market that's right close to us. But another thing between the two of them, they pointed out is something that I think our ag community is underappreciated for. When Todd's talking about saving the strong bees and letting the weak ones die, and we're talking about breeding grains that live here and they're doing it organically, that is all for the benefit of the climate. And you know, when our colleagues talk about climate change and stuff, the agricultural community has been undervalued in building soil, which is storing carbon and making a sink for the water. And we, you know, you guys in this committee and me, I'm putting it out there every time I can, but there is massive value in that. And there's massive value in the way these guys are farming, in doing the right thing. Because if you spray stuff and you depend on chemicals for your pests all the time, all of a sudden you stop spraying and those pests are going to just ravage you.
Well, LG, you're so right with that. And that's why we are, just new to the committee, all of us except for Senator Collmore. That's why we see a little bit of the attack of the environmentalists coming after the farmers, which we know it isn't right.
Right.
We know that the farmers and themselves care more about the land and what's going on. And they know they're not commercial farmers where they don't care what doesn't happen. They care what happens, and they're doing all the things that you're talking about. And that's why it's a little bit of a personal battle with us, is to, yes, we know that we need to clean water and all of that. And we know what farmers have done as far as to reduce phosphorus flowing into our lakes. And we know what you guys have done to combat the climate change as you can. So,
Well, in the ecosystem services that they don't get paid for.
Right.
You know, when we talk about the carbon
Well-
that's being sequestered in their land.
and it's the same thing as what they're doing as far as to bring dollars into the state with agritourism, as I've said, because everywhere you look, you can think of farmer.
So we need to highlight that with our colleagues in this building and in the press.
Yeah, very true.
And building value into the commodities for value added is so important. I took my VW across the country at the end of my tenure at Bar Hill, filled with gin and vodka for 8 weeks, 7,000 miles, and opened up California, Texas, Illinois, and many states in between. And it worked. And now Vermont is represented all across the country. And then I shifted into grain. But your help with building our infrastructure will have incredible return and is so appreciated and valued. And we really thank you for your time, and we're always ready to come back. And we're grateful for your support.
I always
Listening.
I always enjoy when you go into these places where you travel and you'll look. And I was in a place in Maine and on the top shelf liquor department. And that's what it was. And so it's like, yeah, we know those folks. We know
Made right
they
here
are.
in Montpelier,
Yeah.
and a really important source of jobs and buying organic grain from farmers in Vermont. So thank you.
So support the working lands program, I
Yeah.
think is critical, like enhancing it would be better. A lot of farmers are tapping into it and calling now and asking like, how would I be able to get a grain bin? Is there any opportunities for support on that? Because, you know, there are a lot of farmers that are selling into the livestock market as well, that are looking for infrastructure and trying to build up on their farm. And the working lands really is one of the only places people can go for that type of infrastructure support. So I think that's important. I think it's important for the farms to be able to diversify and add value on their own farm. But in order to serve more farms, we have to have some centralized processing like
Right.
Todd is talking about, because having 25 bags of flour on the shelf is like having 800 types of yogurt to choose from now. And it, you know, at the end of the day, what ends up happening, and what I heard from Jack all the time towards the end of his life, was it was great when there were only 3 of us on the shelf.
Mhm.
But what, you know, too much diversification and without that sort of centralized processing, like we're competing with ourselves.
Well-
So I think we have to have a balance there.
We have to have a balance, and we have to, as Todd has said, you know, the Vermont brand is big. And we need the infrastructure. We also need the distribution. So when you see these facilities like what we have in Hardwick right now, going around and delivering this product around and making it all work. And there was a dozen people before that happened, of people who just couldn't make it work. They were always on a struggle as far as to get that product out there. I can think of, you know, several different people in the Hardwick area until that place came along. But you know, your stories are great. You know, we always like to hear successes, but we always need to know what you need. Where can we help best? I mean, it's just so funny how it is. I mean, I was in committee yesterday without going deep into it, but one senator was really, really pounding for this one group of people that the senator was hoping to protect. And then, you know, I met with one of the lobbyists after and said, does that person even know who he's protecting? Because what he's saying that he's trying to protect isn't anything that industry wants. I know, because I represent them. And so that's the same thing here. We represent you folks. You guys represent us. And so that we need to know where it is that you need the help, so that we can put the attention there and we can stop the noise. As Lieutenant Governor says, it's our job to get out there and advocate for you, but we need to make sure that we're
So we need
advocating in the right
numbers.
spot.
Like, we need numbers. We need that kind of support where we're showing the value. You know, Seth's talking about developing this new sunflower oil market. Well, how big is that? Like, we have no idea. There have been other people that have put bottles of sunflower oil on the shelves before, and it's no longer there. So why is that? And, you know, if Seth wants to grow, or people want to grow and he's going to process, well, how much room is there? Like, we don't have that kind of support to really understand
Right.
the markets. Like, we need that if we're going to grow these markets and realistically attract people here to have businesses and processing, etc. So, you know, we have some groups that do that, but, you know, there's less emphasis. There's a lot of emphasis on value add, but we're missing a lot of information, you know, and I feel like you have consultants trying to put it together, but we need more information. And then you need those numbers to go to your constituents here and say, this is why we want to do this. This is the outcome of that. We need that. That would be helpful.
The numbers to start with,
Yeah.
but then I think a lot more, you mentioned distribution.
Yeah.
And to be able to, I mean, Seth will probably do fine in all the co-ops and stuff here with this, because it's a beautiful product that people love to use. But we need this to be in the New York market,
You're right.
the Boston market, and with all the value added food products in Vermont.
Yeah.
They can't just sell in Vermont, and we've got to
And
also.
why does it have to be in just the co-ops or whatever? If you
Exactly.
can ever
Why
get
is it-
Yeah, I
to.
was gonna add that,
Rice chopper and.
so
Right.
we've been working with Vermont Way Foods a little bit, Matt Landy, Vermont Way Foods, and he introduced us to Hannaford's and Market
Right,
Basket.
There you go.
Right.
And like anytime I show them that label, we've had that label for about a month now. Any store, like including those big ones, want to carry it.
Nice.
So if it goes well in Vermont and he's small, there's definitely the opportunity
Yeah.
to branch out bigger. But we need a place where farmers can ship stuff to, like wet grain or wet sunflowers, or whatever, get it dried, get it ready, have it pressed or something, have a place to be able to process it. Because I don't think we should get into the business of trying to compete or yeah, against the guys in the Midwest. I mean, they have so many more
You
acres
should
than we
take
do.
advantage of what you've said.
Right,
We don't have a brand.
We don't
do have a
need to
brand.
compete with them because of our brand, but the guys that are raising pigs and beef are in the exact same position. They want to raise pigs and beef. They don't want to drive the truck to New York City. So how do we help make that connection and distribution?
No. Well, we're bumping up against our time. Is anybody like to add anything as far as anything?
Thank you.
Thanks.
The tide is rising.
Well, I do. I
All
do
these
agree with that.
collective folks and our community beyond, the tide is rising. But we want to have it rise more. And what it does, it generates tax dollars from tourism or market support, sales in the markets. We appreciate your support with our infrastructure for the tide rising faster than it is.
Hey, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank you very much for letting me be included. Something
No,
I'm very
it's
interested
an
in.
honor to have you here, Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah,
I'm glad you came in.
Important stuff you're doing.
I'm glad you came in.
Thank you.
Green conference
Thank you all.
coming up.
Thank you.
Um,
We'll go